The baby with no name. It was the kind of morning that drifted quietly into the small town of Halston, Oregon. The sun hadn't quite climbed over the pine draped hills, and the local diner hadn't started frying bacon yet. But at Halston Regional Medical Center, something utterly unexpected was unfolding. Dr. Sarah Colburn had delivered hundreds of babies in her career, most of them routine, a few that tested her limits, but none like this. The child had come into the world with a cry so faint it barely touched the air. She weighed 21 pounds and 4 ounces, almost 3 times the size of a typical newborn. But it wasn't her size that stole the words from the delivery room staff. It was her face. A large, vascular mass extended from her lower jaw, curling around her neck and partially pressing into her chest. It pulsed faintly, obscuring her chin and distorting the delicate symmetry of her face. Her eyes, however, dark, wide, impossibly still, met the world as if it owed her something. Jake and Amanda Whitmore, both in their 20s, stood frozen at the edge of the room. Amanda's body was pale and trembling, her hair matted to her forehead, her eyes locked not on the child, but on a fixed spot in the air, somewhere just past her shoulder. Jake didn't say a word. He didn't move when the nurse asked gently, "Would you like to hold her?" Amanda only shook her head. "I can't," she whispered, barely audible. I just can't." Jake turned away. "We need a minute." That minute turned into a decision. By noon, Amanda had signed nothing. Jake left the building. The child remained in the neonatal intensive care unit, unnamed, untouched by the 2 people who brought her into the world. In the hospital records, she was entered as Infant Girl Whitmore. But none of the nurses called her that. "We can't just refer to her like a file," said Margaret Denning, head NICU nurse and 30-year veteran. "She's a person. She needs a name." Hope, a younger nurse, offered quietly. "She looks like she's fighting." And so she became Hope. Hope's condition was critical. The mass, later diagnosed as a lymphangioma, threatened her airway, feeding was impossible through the mouth, and she required oxygen support 24 hours a day. Even the NICU equipment had to be adapted. The standard incubator couldn't accommodate her size, but what was most haunting wasn't her appearance, it was her gaze. "She's watching us," Margaret said one evening, standing beside Hope's specially built incubator. "Not just looking, watching, like she's waiting for something." And in many ways, she was. A week passed. No word from the parents. Amanda had been discharged and never returned. Jake never answered his phone. Child Protective Services were alerted, but no emergency placement would accept a medically complex infant with no insurance, no legal custody, and no confirmed diagnosis. "She doesn't exist in the system," the hospital administrator muttered. "She exists to us," Margaret snapped. "She breathes, she moves, she needs us." One night after her shift, Margaret posted a photo to a private parenting forum she frequented. Nothing sensational, just a blurry photo of Hope's hand wrapped around her finger. "She was left without a name," she wrote, "but not without value." The post went viral. Within 2 days, major parenting blogs had picked it up. By the end of the week, the story was trending nationally. "Giant baby with rare tumor abandoned at birth. Nurses name her Hope." Some responses were cruel, others skeptical, but most were overwhelmed by compassion. Donations began to trickle in, then flood. Diapers, specialized formula, cash donations. One woman from Texas sent a handmade quilt with the embroidered words, "You are more than enough." But even with public support, medical help remained elusive. Until the email came. It was addressed to Dr. Sarah Colburn and began simply, "My name is Dr. Michael Everett. I'm a pediatric surgeon at Lenox Children's Hospital in New York. I saw the story about Hope. I would like to review her case." Sarah recognized the name. Michael Everett wasn't just a surgeon. He was a legend in pediatric reconstructive circles. He had traveled to conflict zones, operated on cleft palates in war-torn regions, taken on impossible cases with meticulous obsession. His daughter had died years ago from a congenital heart defect. Since then, he had thrown himself into the work. Sarah forwarded the files, scans, and reports. 2 days later, he called. "I want to meet her. Don't transfer her yet. I'm coming to Oregon." When Michael Everett entered the NICU that Thursday morning, it was snowing lightly outside. He wore no lab coat, just a dark wool sweater, khakis, and a look that belonged more to a grieving father than a doctor. He didn't ask questions immediately. He just stood beside the incubator and looked. Margaret approached him quietly. She's something, isn't she? She reminds me of someone, he said without looking up. My daughter, Natalie. She had the same eyes, like they could see through you. Do you think you can help her? Margaret asked. Michael finally looked up, his face unreadable. I don't know, but I need to try. That night, in the guest room above the hospital, Michael opened his laptop and began planning what would become one of the most complex pediatric facial surgeries attempted in a non-emergency setting. He didn't do it because he was confident. He did it because something inside him whispered, "This time, don't run." For the next 48 hours, Dr. Michael Everett barely slept. He reviewed every scan of Hope's anatomy. He printed 3D models of her skull and airway. He paced the small consultation room provided by the hospital, murmuring notes into a voice recorder. His fingers moved across a tablet as he sketched out surgical possibilities: incision paths, vascular access points, tracheal protection. Hope's case wasn't just complicated, it was terrifying. The tumor had entwined itself around her carotid artery, curled behind her jawbone, pressed against her windpipe. A single mistake could cost her not just her life, but her capacity to ever breathe or speak independently. But Michael didn't flinch. He worked the way he always had, intensely, methodically, obsessively. But this time something was different. It wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about keeping a promise to Natalie, to himself, and now, somehow, to Hope. On his third day in Halston, Michael sat down with Dr. Sarah Colburn, Nurse Margaret, and the hospital's Legal and Ethics Committee. We need more than approval, Sarah explained. We need guardianship, or at least legal permission. Amanda and Jake haven't responded, without consent. I'll take responsibility, Michael said quietly. Everyone turned. You'll what? Asked the hospital lawyer, brows raised. I'll sponsor her treatment, legally, financially. I'll act as temporary guardian if necessary. That's a significant liability, the administrator cautioned. I've seen worse, Michael replied. She's got no one else, and she doesn't have time. Margaret leaned forward. Do you understand what you're getting into, Dr. Everett? Michael looked her straight in the eye. She's not just a case, she's a life, one worth fighting for. The following day, the hospital posted a new update on its donation page, titled Hope's Fight. It included a short video clip of Michael gently touching Hope's hand through the incubator glass. The internet responded with force. Over $200,000 were raised in 4 days. Pediatric surgical teams from across the country offered their support. A craniofacial specialist from Boston volunteered. A pediatric anesthesiologist in Seattle asked to join. A retired NICU nurse mailed a check for $5,000 with a handwritten note. I couldn't save them all. Please save her. Michael worked with quiet intensity. He declined interviews. He refused to let cameras into the OR, but each night he visited Hope. Sometimes he brought a book, The Little Prince, Charlotte's Web. Other nights he simply sat, watching the rise and fall of her chest. She's stabilizing, Margaret told him one morning. She's gaining weight, tolerating tube feeds. But the tumor is growing too. I know, Michael said, his voice tight. We don't have long. It was on a snowy evening in mid-February when Hope reached up and grasped his finger for the first time. Michael froze. Her grip was strong, purposeful, almost defiant. Her eyes locked onto his, unwavering. And in that moment he felt something shift inside him, some silent thread being tied between them, invisible but unbreakable. You're telling me to hurry up, aren't you? He whispered. She didn't let go. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael and his team finalized every surgical plan. Risk factors were mapped, rehearsals were conducted using 3D printed models, and every team member was briefed repeatedly. Then came the day. February 27th. Hope was 9 weeks old. At 6 a.m., Michael scrubbed in, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of what this day meant. Margaret, now retired but staying on unofficially, helped prep the OR. I've never seen you nervous, she said gently. I've never done this with someone waiting, Michael replied. Hope was wheeled in, asleep under anesthesia, wrapped in a sterile blanket, a tiny crocheted heart tucked beside her by Margaret. The room was silent as Michael stepped to the table. Let's begin, he said. The next 7 hours were an intricate, nerve-wracking ballet of skill and science. The first incision was made just below the jawline. The vascular team worked to isolate blood flow. Monitors beeped, hands moved with robotic precision. At the 4-hour mark, Michael had to pause. One of the arterial branches had split in an unexpected direction. Clamp, he said. Suction. Hold pressure. A nurse wiped sweat from his brow. For a second, the heart monitor dipped, then recovered. By hour 7, the mass was lifted away. It filled an entire surgical tray. Michael stared at it for a moment. This thing that had threatened Hope's life from the moment she was born, now lifeless, now powerless. Close, he said, his voice low. Let's bring her back. By the time Hope was wheeled into post-op, her face was swollen, her throat wrapped in gauze, but her airway was clear. Michael watched her from behind the observation glass, his hands still shaking. You did it, Sarah said beside him. No, he said. She did. That night, Michael sat beside her NICU bed, exhausted. He read from her favorite book. He paused on a line. What makes the desert beautiful, he read aloud, is that somewhere it hides a well. Hope stirred faintly, and Michael knew. She had been his well. He had gone searching for redemption, and he had found her. 3 days after surgery, Hope opened her eyes. Her gaze was cloudy at first, then slowly focused. She blinked once, twice, then again, more deliberately, as if reintroducing herself to a world that hadn't been guaranteed. Michael was there, as he had been every hour since the operation. He was sitting beside her crib, one hand gently resting on the edge, the other holding a paperback copy of Charlotte's Web. The pages had started to curl from overuse. When Hope's eyes met his, he stopped reading. Hey, he whispered. You're still here. The swelling had gone down only slightly, and her face was still bruised and wrapped in delicate gauze. Her tiny chest rose and fell steadily, though still with the faint whistle of effort. But her eyes, they were unmistakably alive. Sarah entered quietly with a chart. Vitals are stable, oxygen holding, no signs of neurological deficit. Michael exhaled. Good. She knows you, Sarah said softly. She tracks your voice. She responds to your touch. That's not just medicine, Mike. He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned closer and whispered, I was afraid I'd lose you. Hope blinked again. That night, in the hospital lounge, Margaret returned for an unofficial visit. She found Michael pacing near the vending machine. You've barely left the floor, she said, offering him a cup of black coffee. I can't, he admitted. Every time I do, I feel like something might happen. She's out of the woods, Margaret said. For now. There was a long silence. Then Margaret asked, What's next? Michael knew what she meant. Hope's surgery had been funded by donations, approved under emergency ethics protocol, and carried out under a temporary medical guardianship. But now that the immediate danger had passed, the state would begin formal placement procedures. She'll go into foster care, Margaret continued. Maybe not right away, but soon. That's how the system works. I know. She's not just a case anymore, Michael. I know, he repeated, quieter this time. Margaret studied him. Do you love her? Michael didn't hesitate. Yes. 2 days later, Michael met with a social worker assigned to Hope's case. Her name was Elaine Carter, a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and a firm tone. She's technically a ward of the state, Elaine explained. Her biological parents never signed relinquishment forms, but they've also refused all contact. That makes placement complicated. I want to apply for guardianship, Michael said. Elaine blinked. You want to foster her? No, he said. I want to adopt her. She stared at him for a long time. You're single. You're a full-time surgeon in New York. You live alone. Do you have any childcare experience outside this situation? I lost a daughter, Michael said quietly, 7 years ago. She was 3. Since then, I've operated on hundreds of children, saved lives. But I never forgot the feeling of holding someone who is yours. Hope may not share my blood, but I've already chosen her, and I think she's already chosen me. Elaine looked down at her folder. Well, we'll begin the home study. It wasn't easy. There were interviews, background checks, psychological assessments. The hospital raised concerns about conflict of interest, about emotional stability. Michael faced them all with quiet resolve. Meanwhile, Hope continued to recover. She began physical therapy. A feeding specialist worked with her daily. Her vocal cords, bruised from pressure and surgery, produced only hoarse whispers and occasional croaks. But her body gained strength. More importantly, she started to smile. The first time came during a music session. A volunteer brought in a ukulele and played You Are My Sunshine. Hope's eyes widened, and when the chorus came around, her mouth moved. No sound, but unmistakably mouthing the word sunshine. Michael had to step out of the room. He cried in the stairwell. One afternoon, Sarah found him in the hospital courtyard, staring at a stack of adoption paperwork. "She's going to be yours," she said. "I don't know how to be a father again," he admitted. "Not really. You already are." Hope was discharged from Halston Regional 2 weeks later. The NICU staff threw a small farewell party. There were balloons, a Go Hope banner, and a cake that said, "You're going home." Margaret carried Hope through the main lobby, her arms trembling, not from strain, but from emotion. Michael waited outside. It's standing beside a Blentel SUV. When he saw them, his breath caught. He reached out, took Hope into his arms, and for the first time since surgery, she giggled, a quiet, raspy sound that still filled the parking lot like music. "You're coming home," he whispered. The drive from Oregon to New York was long, but Michael insisted on doing it by road. He didn't want to rush. Didn't want to hand her off to a flight crew or let her first breath of new air come through a pressurized cabin. They stopped at roadside diners, took photos beside state lines, and stayed in motels with plastic key cards and floral curtains. Michael told her stories, some real, some made up, as she rested in her car seat. Every night, he wrote in a small leather notebook. "Today, we moved one state closer. Today, she laughed at a squirrel. Today, I felt like I belonged again." When they arrived in Manhattan, the apartment felt too quiet. So Michael played music. He installed a mobile of stars above her crib. He painted the nursery a pale green and hung a sign that read, "Hope's Room." He framed the first drawing she ever made, a messy swirl of red and yellow, and placed it above his desk. Weeks passed. Home visits were made. Evaluators came and went. Friends dropped off meals. Coworkers sent gifts. Hope had follow-up appointments, new therapy schedules, and a pediatrician who insisted on calling her little fighter. Then one afternoon, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. Michael opened it with shaking hands. At the top, in bold font, "Final adoption approval, Michael Everett, Hope Everett." He didn't cry. He just walked into her room, picked her up, and said, "It's official, kiddo. You're mine." Hope looked at him, eyes gleaming, and for the first time her voice, still gravelly, still soft, found the word she had been practicing for weeks, Dada. Hope was legally Michael's daughter now. But there was still so much to relearn, about living, about healing, about the long, winding journey between silence and speech. Despite the success of her surgery, Hope's vocal cords had suffered permanent trauma. Her voice, though present, was faint and hoarse, often reduced to whispers. Some days it worked. Some days it didn't. And on the days it didn't, she'd retreat into quiet, folding her body into the corners of their apartment like she wanted to disappear. Michael noticed. He saw it in the way she clutched the edges of her sleeve, in how she hesitated before speaking, even to him. It wasn't fear. It was grief. Grief for something most children never think twice about, the right to speak freely. He sat with her one evening on the fire escape of their building, the sun melting into the skyline. "You don't need a loud voice to be heard," he told her. "You have eyes that say things people miss, hands that draw what most can't describe. And when your voice comes back, even if it's just a little, it'll carry everything that mattered most." Hope nodded but said nothing. Her eyes lingered on the light. That weekend, Michael brought home something new, a set of flashcards with images and corresponding words. He placed them on the floor between them. Apple, car, love, music, breathe. She picked up the love card and held it to her chest. From then on, they added more. A secondhand whiteboard appeared on the refrigerator. Hope scribbled daily messages. "Good morning, Dada. Sky looks like cotton today. I want grilled cheese." Michael responded in kind. "Love you always. Proud of you. Grilled cheese coming up." They began using simple sign language, pointing, gesturing, mouthing sounds. It was clumsy at first, often funny. Hope turned it into a game. She'd make up gestures, and Michael would try to guess the meaning. Sometimes he got it wrong. She'd roll her eyes, then laugh. An airy, scratchy sound, but it was hers. Speech therapy followed. 3 times a week, a specialist named Megan came to their apartment with tools and exercises. Hope practiced breath control, phonation, vowel shapes. She blew bubbles, hummed into straws, whispered poems. Progress was slow, but Megan never pushed too hard. "Her voice isn't broken," Megan explained. "It's just learning to come back." Outside of therapy, Hope found new ways to express herself. She drew, constantly. Entire afternoons disappeared into swirls of color, chalk dust on her fingers, pages pinned to the living room wall. Her drawings became narratives, portraits of floating islands, animals with patchwork fur, children with wings. Michael noticed that in nearly every picture there was a tall figure with gentle eyes and an outstretched hand. He never asked, but she knew he saw. Then came the letters. One day, Michael opened the mail to find a thick manila envelope with no return address. Inside were 4 crayon drawings, no notes, just pictures. Hope sat across the room watching him closely. He looked at each one. The first was a hospital crib with a baby wrapped in wires. The second, a faceless woman walking away. The third, a man holding a baby under a sky full of stars. And the fourth, Hope standing tall, speaking in a speech bubble that read, "I'm still here." Michael looked up. Hope met his eyes. Her lips moved. Still here. That night, he couldn't sleep. He got out of bed, walked quietly into her room, and sat on the edge of her bed. Hope stirred but didn't wake. Her fingers twitched under the blanket, as if drawing even in sleep. He looked up at the ceiling. It had become her gallery. Taped above the bed were dozens of stars she'd made from construction paper, each one labeled with a word: safe, home, better, trying, smile, stay. At the center was the largest star. It read, voice. As spring approached, Hope began joining Michael at his hospital during his off hours. She'd sit quietly in the pediatric lounge, drawing or reading while he checked charts or followed up with residents. The staff adored her. She reminded many of them why they'd entered medicine in the first place. One afternoon, Michael found her alone in an exam room, staring at a stethoscope. She picked it up, placed the earpieces into her ears, and pressed the bell to her chest. Michael stepped in. "You hear anything?" Hope nodded, then wrote on the whiteboard. "It's like a drum, a soft one." He smiled. "That's your heartbeat. Still here, still strong." She erased the board, then wrote, "Can I be a doctor too?" He paused, then nodded. "You already are, in some way. You understand people. That's more than half of medicine." That night, she drew herself in a white coat. Underneath, she wrote, "Dr. Hope Everett, pediatrician, listener." But not everything was simple. Some children at school stared. Some asked questions Hope couldn't answer fast enough. One boy called her frog voice. Another said, "Why does she talk like a robot?" Hope didn't cry, not in public. But that night, she sat at dinner, silent, pushing spaghetti in circles. Michael tried to lighten the mood. "You made a new comic today?" She shook her head. "Want me to read you something?" She shook again. Then she got up, fetched her whiteboard, and wrote, "Do you wish I had a normal voice?" Michael blinked, then pushed his plate aside. He took the marker from her hand and wrote underneath, "Your voice is exactly how it's meant to be, because it's yours." Hope didn't look convinced. He added another line, "I don't love the sound of your voice, I love what you say." She looked at the board for a long time, then reached for his hand, and for the rest of dinner, they sat in silence. A silence not of absence, but of knowing, of trust, of 2 voices, one soft, one steady, learning to share the same song. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It came in a plain white envelope, nestled between a stack of medical journals and a grocery flyer, addressed in handwriting that trembled with age or weakness. There was no return address, no signature on the front, just 2 words, penned in uneven ink, Michael Everett. He almost tossed it aside, but something about the way the letters leaned, like they were struggling to stand, made him pause. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. The writing was cramped, the ink smudged in places, as if tears had fallen before the words dried. "Dr. Everett, I know I gave up something I didn't understand. I know I don't deserve anything. Not your time, not her forgiveness, but I am dying. And before I go, I just want to see her once, just to say I'm sorry. I don't expect redemption. I just need to leave knowing I didn't vanish completely. If there's space in your heart for a goodbye, I would be grateful." There was a phone number, barely legible. Michael read the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it in his drawer. He sat at his desk long after the sun had disappeared from the windows, staring at nothing. He hadn't thought about Amanda Whitmore in years, the woman who gave birth to Hope, the woman who looked once at her newborn and turned away, the woman who never called, never asked, never tried. He didn't hate her, but he had locked her away somewhere deep, like a ghost he'd never wanted to meet again, and now she was reaching back. That night, after Hope had fallen asleep, he sat in the living room and called the number. A woman answered. Her voice was weak, raspy, a shadow of what it might once have been. Yes? She asked. Is this Amanda Whitmore? A pause. Then, you called. I got your letter. She didn't respond right away. Then softly, thank you for not throwing it away. I almost did. I don't blame you. There was silence between them for a moment. Then she said, I've seen her. Not in person, online. I saw her TEDx talk, her drawings. She's beautiful. Michael's voice was steady. She's extraordinary. She was always meant to be. I just wasn't. What happened to you? Cancer, Amanda whispered. Pancreatic. Stage 4. I've got maybe a month. He breathed slowly. I don't want anything, she continued. No contact, no pictures, no expectations. Just one moment. Just to say the words I couldn't say before. I'll ask her, he said. Amanda let out a breath, almost like a sob. That's more than I deserve. The next day, Michael picked Hope up from school and took her to the park. They sat on a bench under a tree that had just started to bloom. Birds sang in the distance. Children laughed from a swing set. Hope, he began, I got a letter. She looked up. It was from someone from the very beginning, your birth mother. Hope blinked, her lips slightly parted. She's very sick. She doesn't have long. She asked if she could see you. Just once. Hope didn't respond right away. She pulled her knees up onto the bench, wrapped her arms around them. Do I have to? No, Michael said gently. You never have to. This is entirely your choice. She stayed silent, then wrote in her notebook, Would you come with me? Of course. 2 days later, they flew to San Diego, where Amanda was in hospice care at a small seaside facility. The nurse greeted them with a quiet nod. She's awake. She's been asking for you. Hope held Michael's hand tightly as they walked down the hallway. Her steps were small, hesitant, like each one weighed more than the last. Amanda's room smelled of salt and lavender. The window was open, letting in a soft breeze. She lay in bed, thin, pale, her eyes sunken but alert. When she saw Hope, she sat up straighter, struggling to breathe evenly. Michael stayed by the door. Hope stepped closer. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Amanda whispered, You're so much more than I imagined. Hope didn't reply. I don't expect you to say anything, Amanda continued, her voice trembling. I just need to say something. I'm sorry. I was afraid. I looked at you, and all I saw was my own failure. I didn't see you. Tears streamed down her face. You didn't deserve that. You were innocent, and I left. I've lived every day with that choice, and I needed you to know that if I could go back, I would hold you. I would stay. Hope stepped forward. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a drawing. It showed 2 figures, one fading into the background, the other walking forward, wrapped in golden light. She handed it to Amanda. Amanda took it with shaking fingers. Her eyes filled again. You drew this? Hope nodded. Amanda pressed it to her chest. Thank you. There was no long conversation, no dramatic reconciliation, just a small girl and a fading woman in a room filled with the quiet hum of forgiveness. When they left, Amanda whispered, You don't have to remember me, but I'll remember this. Hope didn't look back. But when they got outside, she reached for Michael's hand and said, barely audible, I'm glad I went. Back in New York, they resumed their life. But something had changed. Hope was lighter, her drawings more vibrant, her voice a touch steadier. And one night, she added a new star to the ceiling above her bed, a small silver one. She wrote one word on it in block letters, goodbye. By the time Hope turned 8, she had grown into her name. She walked with purpose. Her words, though still soft, now carried intention. She didn't speak often, but when she did, people listened. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Deliberate, thoughtful, clear. And she always wore red shoes. It started with a pair Michael had bought for her birthday. Bright, rubber-soled sneakers with a single white star on the side. She loved them immediately. Wore them until the soles thinned and the red faded into a washed-out pink. When they finally tore, she cried, not because they were ruined, but because they had taken her places. To school, to the hospital, to the stage where she'd first shared her story. Michael replaced them with an identical pair. Hope called them her lucky shoes. Everywhere she went, book readings, hospital visits, even therapy sessions, people remembered her by those shoes. That's the little girl with the red shoes, they'd whisper. But what made her stand out wasn't her shoes. It was how she stood in them. At school, Hope was ahead of her grade in reading, and her artwork often hung in the main hallway. But she still carried the marks of her early life. Her scars remained, faint but visible. Her voice still cracked on certain syllables. And she had moments when old doubts returned, moments when she felt like she didn't quite belong. One day during recess, a group of kids pointed at her and laughed. She talks like a robot. Her neck looks weird. She's a Frankenstein. Hope stood frozen. Her face didn't change, but her hands clenched at her sides. When she got home, she didn't speak. She skipped dinner, curled under a blanket on the couch, and stared at the ceiling. Michael sat beside her, wordless. He waited. Finally, she whispered, "Do I scare people?" He looked at her, startled. "What? My voice, my face, am I scary?" Michael shook his head. "No, people are scared of what they don't understand. You're not scary, you're brave." She was quiet again. Then she said, "Sometimes I wish I looked like everyone else." Michael nodded slowly. "And sometimes I wish I could fix everything for you. But if you looked like everyone else, you wouldn't be Hope. And the world doesn't need another someone else. It needs you." That night, she didn't draw. She didn't speak much. But the next morning, she laced up her red shoes, pulled her hair into a bun, and walked out the door a little taller than the day before. Later that week, she returned to school with a new painting tucked under her arm. It was titled "The Armor You Can't See." It showed a girl standing on a small hill, facing away from a crowd. Her back was covered in cracks and scars, but also light, ribbons of yellow and gold streaming outward, turning the breaks into brightness. The teachers framed it. That year, the school counselor invited Hope to speak at an assembly on inclusion and kindness. Hope didn't want to stand alone, so Michael joined her on stage. He said only one thing. "I adopted Hope because I wanted to be the kind of person who stays. And I stay because she reminds me every single day why love isn't a condition, it's a choice." The students clapped. Hope smiled, and the girl who once could not speak stood before 500 people and read a poem she'd written the night before. It went, "Some voices are loud and some are small, but both can break silence like waterfalls. Don't judge the words by how they sound, but by the courage that lifts them from the ground." Her voice wavered near the end, but she finished. When she stepped off stage, a classmate she barely knew came up to her and said, "You made me cry, in a good way." Hope nodded. "Me too." That evening, she and Michael walked home under a sky blooming with dusk. "I was nervous," she admitted. "I know," he said, "but I wanted to say it anyway." He looked down at her shoes, now dusty from the playground. "They're still lucky," he said. Hope smiled. "No, I think I am." In the months that followed, Hope's story continued to ripple outward. A local newspaper ran a feature on her titled "The Girl with the Red Shoes, A Story of Courage." A national education nonprofit invited her to be part of their youth ambassador program. She didn't understand all of it. She didn't care about attention, but she cared about being heard. And she used that space to talk about the things that mattered: kindness, forgiveness, choosing to stay. She wrote letters to children who were recovering from surgeries. She visited the NICU at Michael's hospital to sit with families. She carried a small notebook where she'd write things she wished someone had said to her. "You're not broken. You're allowed to be sad. You are more than how you began." One night, as Michael was tucking her in, Hope asked, "Do you think I'll always be the girl with the story?" He sat on the edge of her bed. "Maybe, but the story's growing. And someday, people won't just know what happened to you. They'll know what you did with it." She was quiet, then said, "I want to be the person who stays, like you." He smiled. "You already are." And before he turned off the light, Hope pointed at the ceiling, at a new star she had hung up. It was gold, with one word written in red ink, "Belong." The auditorium was silent, save for the soft hum of anticipation. Hope stood behind the curtain, her red shoes planted firmly on the scuffed wooden floor. She could hear the host's voice echoing through the speaker system, introducing the next speaker at the annual TEDx Youth Conference in Manhattan. "And now," the host said, "we welcome a young artist, writer, and advocate whose voice may be quiet, but whose message is anything but." Hope took a breath. Michael stood backstage with her, hands in his pockets, trying not to show how tightly his heart was pounding. "You ready?" he whispered. Hope nodded. Her hands trembled only slightly. I think so. When she stepped onto the stage, the spotlight washed over her like warmth. Rows of faces blurred into shadows. The red circle beneath her feet looked bigger than it had in rehearsal. But she didn't shrink. She walked to the center, waited, then began. My name is Hope Everett, she said. Her voice was soft but clear, shaped by months of therapy and practice. You might know me as the girl with the red shoes, or the baby born with a tumor, or the kid who doesn't talk much. She paused. I used to think my story was about what happened to me, about what was wrong with me, about what I didn't have, like a normal voice, or a mother who stayed, or a face that didn't make people stare. Another pause. She let the silence stretch. But I've learned something, she continued. Your story doesn't start with what you're missing. It starts the moment someone chooses to stay. Michael blinked hard. Hope glanced backstage, just for a second, then back to the audience. My dad, he wasn't there when I was born. He didn't know me when I needed help the most. But when he saw me, he didn't walk away. He didn't flinch. He stayed. He listened. And eventually, he gave me something no surgery ever could. She smiled. He gave me a name and a home and a reason to believe I was more than how I started. A photo appeared behind her on the screen. It was her, just weeks after surgery. A hospital crib, tubes, scars, and yet eyes wide open searching. That was me, she said. But it's not the whole story. Another image, her standing beside her father, both wearing matching red shoes, paint on their hands, smiles on their faces. This is also me. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small folded paper star, and held it up. At home, my ceiling is full of stars. Each one has a word on it. I write one every time something big happens. This one, she said, unfolding it, says truth. Because today I'm telling mine. There was a quiet murmur in the crowd. Hope took one more breath. If there's someone out there who feels like they don't belong, like their voice is too small, too broken, too strange, I want you to know you are still here, and sometimes that's enough. Applause began, soft at first, then growing. By the time she walked off stage, the room was on its feet. Backstage, Michael met her with open arms. She walked straight into them, burying her face in his shirt. You were incredible, he whispered. I was terrified, she mumbled. That's how you know it mattered. That night, the video of her talk began to circulate online. Within hours, it had thousands of views. Within days, hundreds of thousands. People wrote in from around the world. Parents of children with disabilities, speech therapists, foster families, teens who had never spoken up before. One message read, I thought I was invisible, then I heard you. Hope read each one carefully. She saved the ones that felt like stars and wrote the senders' names in a small notebook labeled People Who Heard Me. She didn't feel famous, she felt seen. And that was enough. A few weeks later, her school hosted a community night. Parents, teachers, and students gathered to celebrate art, stories, and achievements from the past year. Hope's class set up a booth titled My Journey in One Word. Each student chose a word and created a small display to represent it. Some picked strong or kind or learning. Hope chose becoming. Her board had 3 parts. On the left, a drawing of a baby in a hospital bed, wrapped in shadows. In the middle, a girl holding hands with a tall figure, walking under a sky of stars. On the right, a girl standing on a stage, red shoes glowing, a spotlight above her. Underneath, in her neat, slanted handwriting, she wrote, I'm not done yet. People stopped, read, some cried. A woman approached Michael after the event. She's remarkable, she said. You must be proud. Michael smiled. Every day. She reminds me of my daughter, the woman continued. We lost her 3 years ago. She couldn't speak either, but she told stories with her eyes. Michael placed a hand on her shoulder. Then you understand. I do, the woman whispered. Later that evening, as they walked home, Hope said, Did you see the old lady with the blue scarf? Yes. She said her daughter died. Michael nodded. Hope looked down at her feet. I think I made her feel like her daughter mattered again. You probably did. Silence fell between them as the city lights blinked to life. Then Hope said, I want to help more people like her. You already are. No, I mean for real, like when I grow up. Michael smiled. You mean like a job? She nodded. Maybe a therapist, or a doctor, or someone who just listens. People need listeners. That they do. At home, she pulled out her paper stars and added a new one to the ceiling. It was white, with gold edges. She wrote on it, voice, even without sound. As she climbed into bed, she looked at Michael. Do you think my story is too much? No, he said. I think your story is exactly enough, and it's only just beginning. Summer in New York had a kind of golden chaos to it. Streets buzzed with energy, parks were full of laughter, and the sun lingered longer than it needed to. Hope liked it that way. She liked watching people live out loud. But she also liked the quiet moments, sketching at the edge of the community pool, reading on the rooftop garden Michael had built with too many potted plants and exactly one wind chime. It had become their ritual. Friday evenings on the roof, dinner on their laps, Hope curled beside him, sketchpad in hand. One such evening, a call came. Michael stepped inside to answer, and when he returned, his face held a look aglow. Hope had come to know. It wasn't panic. It wasn't fear. It was memory, something deeper, older. Who was it? She asked, setting her pencil down. He sat beside her. Someone from Pine Hill, the hospital where you were born. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes stilled. They're putting together an exhibit, he said, a tribute to stories that changed the hospital. They asked if we'd come back, just for a day, just to visit. To visit where it all started, he nodded. She was quiet. Then, do you think I should? I think it's up to you. That night, she stared at the ceiling in her room. Her paper stars shimmered in the low light. She counted them. 56, each one a moment, a word, a battle won. She stood on her bed, reached for a new one, and wrote, Return. 2 weeks later, they flew across the country. Halston, Oregon hadn't changed much. The trees still lined the roads like guardians. The hospital stood small but sturdy against the curve of the hills. Hope held Michael's hand tighter than usual as they walked through the sliding glass doors. Inside, familiar faces waited. Margaret was the first to step forward. Her hair had grayed, and her posture had softened, but her eyes were just the same, bright, alert, warm. She looked at Hope and whispered, You really are here. Hope smiled. Then, for the first time, she did something Margaret hadn't expected. She hugged her. Margaret held her close, eyes brimming. You were so small, so strong. We all knew you were going to change everything. They walked together through the NICU. It had been renovated. The walls were painted seafoam green now. The machines were sleeker, the windows wider. But the room where Hope had once lived still bore a small plaque, in honor of Hope Everett, whose first breath changed us. Hope ran her fingers over it. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. The exhibit was small but full of heart. Photos of NICU graduates lined the hall, drawings, letters, newspaper clippings. In the center stood a glass display. Inside it, a tiny pair of red shoes, her original ones faded and worn. A card beneath read, Sometimes the smallest steps lead to the loudest echoes. Hope stared at them. I don't remember them being so small, she said. You were, Michael said. But I don't feel small. He smiled. You're not. Later that afternoon, they visited the garden behind the hospital. Staff had planted a tree in her name years ago. Now it was tall, with leaves that rustled like whispers. Hope sat beneath it, sketchbook open. Margaret joined her quietly. I used to sit here after night shifts and wonder if we'd done the right thing, letting him take you. Hope looked up. He didn't just take me, she said. He stayed. Margaret nodded. That's what made the difference. Hope drew for a while in silence, then asked, Do you think people remember how it felt? What do you mean? When I was born, when no one wanted to hold me. Margaret paused. We remember, but not like a wound, like a starting point, a place you walked away from. Hope nodded, then held up her drawing. It showed the hospital, small and glowing, with a path leading away, lined with stars. She titled it, Where I Began, Not Where I Stayed. On their last evening in Halston, Michael and Hope visited Amanda's grave. It was a modest headstone at the edge of a hill, shaded by pine. Hope brought flowers, wild ones she'd picked near the trail. She knelt, not solemn, not afraid, just present. I don't think I ever hated you, she whispered, but I used to wonder if I made you leave. I don't wonder anymore. She placed the flowers gently. I think you gave me a different beginning, and I'm still writing the rest. They stayed a moment longer, then walked away. As they boarded the flight home, Michael asked, How are you feeling? Hope looked out the window. Like I'm not just a story someone else started, like I'm becoming the author. And when they arrived in New York, she added a new star to her ceiling. It said, Home Again. Autumn arrived in New York with crisp air and trees burning orange along the sidewalks. Hope had started middle school. New teachers, new hallways, new lockers with stiff metal doors. She was taller now, more confident. But some things stayed the same. She still wore red shoes. She still added stars to her ceiling. And sometimes she still had questions that lived deep in her chest. One Friday afternoon after school, Hope walked home alone for the first time. She didn't say much when she got in, just set down her backpack, pulled out a notebook, and sat at the kitchen counter while Michael stirred a pot of soup on the stove. "Good day?" he asked. She shrugged. He turned, watching her closely. Hope looked up. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." She hesitated, then asked the question she'd been holding for months. "If you hadn't taken me home, where would I have gone?" Michael was silent for a long time. Then he pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe into the foster system, maybe to a family who wasn't ready, or maybe to someone else who would have loved you differently. But I know where you didn't go. You didn't disappear." Hope nodded slowly. "I used to think about that a lot, about other versions of me, the ones who weren't adopted, the ones who weren't okay." He reached for her hand. "I think about them too, and I thank the universe every day that this version of you, right here, is the one I get to love." She leaned into his shoulder, then asked, "Does that make me lucky, or just lucky enough?" Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the girl beside him, this child who had started life fighting to breathe, who now walked home alone, asked hard questions, and painted her truth in bold colors. "I think it makes you brave," he said, "not just for surviving, but for staying open, for asking, for choosing to still hope." Hope didn't respond, but the next morning a new paper star appeared on her ceiling. It read, "Still asking." Later that week, Hope's class was assigned a project titled My Origin Story. Most kids wrote about grandparents or immigration. Some talked about their cities, their neighborhoods, their names. Hope hesitated. She didn't want to be the girl with the medical file again. She didn't want the pity or the spotlight. But she didn't want to lie either. So she wrote something else. When it was her turn to present, she stood in front of the class with a folded sheet of paper. "My name is Hope Everett," she began, "and this is my origin story." She took a breath. "I was born with a tumor on my face. It made me look different, made it hard to breathe. My birth parents left. The hospital named me because no one else had. I lived in a plastic crib. People didn't know if I would survive." A few students shifted in their seats. But then someone came. A doctor who wasn't supposed to stay. He read me stories. He stood by my bed, and when no one else said yes, he did. She opened her paper and showed a sketch. Two stick figures holding hands. One small, one tall, both wearing red shoes. "My story didn't begin with love," she said, "but it found its way there." After class, a girl named Bella came up to her. "My brother's in foster care," Bella said quietly. "He doesn't talk about it, but I think he'd like your story." Hope nodded. "You can tell him. I think you should." The next day, Hope brought in a copy of her speech and handed it to Bella. Later, Bella slipped her a note that read, "He cried when he read it." Not the sad kind, the other kind. Hope folded it carefully and taped it to her wall. That evening, she added another star. This one read, "My words can travel." Meanwhile, Michael had his own questions to face. A new hospital was opening a pediatric research wing in Chicago and had offered him a leadership role. It was everything he'd once dreamed of: resources, impact, the chance to shape care on a national level. But it also meant leaving New York, leaving their life. He brought it up at dinner. "They've asked me to consider moving," he said carefully. Hope's fork paused midair. "Why?" "It's a big opportunity, the kind that doesn't come twice." Hope didn't speak right away. "Then, would I have to change schools?" "Yes." "Leave my room?" "Yes." "My stars?" Michael smiled faintly. "Those come with us." She put down her fork. "Do you want it?" Michael considered. "I used to, a lot, but now I'm not sure, because I don't want to move if it means pulling you away from everything that makes you feel grounded." Hope stared at her plate, then said, "What if we go and make a new map?" He blinked. "You'd want to go?" "I think, maybe, if it's our choice, not something that happens to us, but something we do together." He smiled, and that night, they sat down and drew a new star for the ceiling. They both wrote on it, "The next chapter." They moved in spring, not because they had to, but but because they chose to. The apartment in Chicago was smaller, but the windows were wider, and Hope said the light made it feel bigger. Michael started his new role at the Children's Hospital in late March. His schedule shifted, more administration, fewer surgeries. But every evening, he came home in time to cook dinner and read the news beside Hope while she sketched. Their new apartment had higher ceilings. Hope brought her paper stars, stacked carefully in a shoebox labeled Sky Archive. They took turns hanging them, one by one, each word a memory suspended in quiet reverence. Belong, goodbye, still asking, voice, becoming. Hope started at a new school with fewer familiar faces. It took time, as it always did, to find rhythm. But within a few weeks, the art teacher was already pinning her drawings to the hallway board. One boy in her homeroom called her Shoes, a nickname that stuck not as an insult, but as a quiet badge of recognition. She told no one her story. Not yet. It was hers now. Not a headline, not a file, not even a performance. Just a truth she carried quietly, ready to share when the moment felt right. One such moment came in April. The hospital hosted a day of gratitude, honoring former patients, donors, and community advocates. Michael was scheduled to speak. At the last minute, he asked Hope if she'd stand beside him on stage. She blinked. "You want me to talk?" "No, I want you to be seen," she agreed. When they stepped into the bright light of the hospital auditorium, the crowd hushed. Doctors, nurses, families, people who had known sorrow, recovery, and the long road in between. Michael spoke first. He told the story not of Hope's beginning, but of her choice. "How we start isn't always up to us," he said, "but how we keep going, that's where our power lives." He paused, then looked at her. "And sometimes, a child teaches you everything you forgot to believe." The room stirred. Hope stepped forward. She didn't speak. Instead, she held up one of her drawings. A girl in red shoes, a winding road behind her, a sky full of stars ahead, at the bottom, still becoming. There was a moment of stillness, then applause. Afterward, an older woman approached her. "My grandson was born with a facial difference. He's still afraid to show his face, but I think maybe you could change that." Hope nodded, then reached into her backpack and handed the woman a folded star. "Tell him," she said softly, "that this one's for him." That night, she added a new star to her own ceiling, passing it on. In the months that followed, Hope settled further into herself. Her voice, still soft, still raspy, grew steady in its cadence. She began writing letters to children in hospitals. Some she'd met, most she hadn't. Each letter ended the same way: "You are more than how you began." Michael often found her asleep at her desk, head resting on her arms, pen still in hand. He never moved her. Just draped a blanket over her shoulders and turned out the light. One evening, he came home to find her sitting in the middle of the living room floor, surrounded by a dozen pieces of paper. "What's this?" he asked. She looked up. "An idea." "For what?" "A book," she said, "about a girl who was born different, who wore red shoes, who didn't speak loudly but said something true." He smiled. "You want to publish it?" "No, I want to give it to kids, in hospitals, or homes, or anywhere they feel like they don't belong." Michael sat beside her. "You know, I used to think I saved you," he said. Hope looked at him. "You didn't?" He shook his head. "I think we saved each other." That weekend, they started assembling the book. Hope wrote, drew, designed the cover. Michael handled the printing, the logistics, the mailing lists. They called it Stars You Can Hold. The first shipment went to Pine Hill Hospital. Inside every copy, Hope had taped a tiny folded star. Not for luck, for memory. The project grew, slowly, quietly, but with weight. Children wrote back, sent drawings, letters, questions. Hope read every one. She kept them in a box beside her bed. Sometimes she'd sit for hours with them, just listening to the voices of other kids becoming. On the day she turned 12, Michael made pancakes in the shape of stars. They danced in the kitchen to old Motown songs. He gave her a small box with a new pair of red shoes inside. She laughed. "These are going to get messy. They always do." That night, she added one more star, the final one in that apartment. Enough. As she lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling she had turned into a map of her life, she whispered, "I think I'm ready." Michael, standing quietly in the doorway, asked, "Ready for what?" She turned toward him. "To stop surviving, to start becoming." He walked to her, sat on the edge of the bed, and took her hand. "You already are." Outside the window, stars blinked into the sky. Not paper ones, but just as real, just as earned. Epilogue. Most people remember the story of Hope Everett as the miracle baby who defied odds, who spoke softly but lived loudly. But to those who truly knew her, she wasn't just a headline. She was a girl who taught others how to stay, how to speak without shouting, how to heal without hiding, and how to begin again, no matter where the story started. Because she had learned something too many forget. You are not what was done to you. You are what you do next. And she chose to become.